The Sonos Beam is now in its second generation, and indeed from its predecessor adds HDMI eARC, Dolby Atmos, and has got 5 active drivers up from 3. Now in this review you can see if it's actually worth its price tag, because in the UK and indeed at the time of filming it can be found for £500, while in the US it can be found for $500. Now to kick off this review I would like to talk about its aesthetics, and here the dimensions of the soundbar will be on your screen so you can size it up for yourself. In my case, I've got a 55-inch TV and it's sitting on a cabinet. I've got no problems whatsoever and it doesn't obscure any of my view either. It is worth highlighting that you have also got the ability to wall mount it, although you'll have to purchase an additional extra for it. Now when it comes to its design, from its predecessor it has got a new grille and a monochromatic finish. I'm actually not too fond of the latter because it does actually attract quite a bit of fingerprints. You might be thinking, why on earth would this be of relevance to me? Well, because you do not have a bundled remote and indeed will have to rely on the app, or you have got touch sensitive buttons placed at the top of it. Now the buttons themselves are actually very responsive. I've got no complaints whatsoever when it comes to a usability point of view, but I still would have preferred physical buttons. So next up we get onto the app, and here you have got a plethora of different options. First off, you've got the favorite tab, then you've got the music tab. So for example, you can select Sonos Radio, and then you can also see what is playing. So if we were to click on here, you can see the TV is currently playing and it's picking up the Dolby Digital 5.1 metadata. So it's great to see that the metadata is displayed straight from here. Here you've also got the ability to adjust the crossfade, the sleep timer, and also adjust the volume directly and even see what's in the queue. It is all very comprehensive and indeed intuitively laid out. You've also got the ability to search between artists, stations and genres, and then within this tab you have got the system menu. Now here you can see the products that have been added, so for example the Beam, and if we go into it we can change the room, we can see the product, and we can also enable or disable Wi-Fi or the microphone, which is all very handy. You can set up surrounds and the subwoofer, and then you've also got the EQ controls. So in this respect I've added +2 to bass, +4 to treble and left loudness enabled. Then you've also got height audio, although that is a little bit irrelevant in my case, but we'll touch upon that very shortly. You've also got the volume limit, which you can set, and you've also got spatial music if you want to toggle it on and off. Then you've got more options, so for example, TV autoplay, adjusting the lip sync delay of your TV if you have one, and then you've also got the IR, which you can enable or disable, and go through the controller setup. You've also got the voice assistant function if you want to enable it, be it through Google Assistant, Amazon Alexa, or the Sonos voice control. And then you've also got the ability to enable or disable the status lights and the touch controls. Now finally you've got a few other tabs which I'm not going to jump into, but you've also got the service and voice one. Here you can indeed go through the voice assistant, as I did touch upon before, and then you can also add a service. Arguably one of the key selling points of any Sonos products, as it allows you to wirelessly stream straight to your device and therefore use any of the chosen services, and in this respect you have got plenty to choose from. So moving past the app, I would like to talk about connectivity, and here I've actually got quite a few different problems that I would like to highlight with the Beam Gen 2. Now first off, when it comes to wireless transmission, you have not got Bluetooth. I know Sonos is pretty notorious of actually omitting Bluetooth altogether, but it would be great to actually see it included on a modern product. Alas, that's not the case. So what about when it comes to Wi-Fi? Well, here you're limited to the 2.4 GHz frequency only, and you do not have support for 5 GHz. You've also not got support for all sorts of network types, even including on Sonos's website you'll be able to see a little blurb as to what you should actually go ahead and do. Now personally I think this is actually really lazy. Coming and just having watched some reviews of the latest NVIDIA RTX 3060 Ti and people claiming this was a 2016 graphics card released in 2023, that's the same sort of analogy I would like to give about this soundbar. Not having 5 GHz natively on the soundbar severely limits your audience or will leave a lot of people frustrated, including myself. Now let me put it into perspective. I have got a mesh system. It operates on a 2.4 and 5 GHz frequency, and I do not want to manually set it to 2.4 GHz with a different SSID just for this Sonos soundbar. I shouldn't have to do that because we're in 2023, not 2016. Indeed, in this respect, it meant that using my mesh network, I was not able to actually connect up this soundbar to my network. So you might be thinking, how on earth did you show the app? Well, I had a very long Ethernet cable trailing from my router straight into the Ethernet port of the soundbar, and therefore was able to get up and go and do all the firmware updates, and of course showcase the app like I did before. Now that is really not ideal for a lot of consumers, such as like myself. But let's say, for example, 2.4 GHz is perfectly fine for you, you've got a different SSID, and you're not too bothered about that. Well, let me actually bring on some more bad news. Here, when it comes to physical connectivity, you've only got the singular HDMI eARC output, and therefore means that if you're connecting up to your television, it's great. However, if you've got a 4K Blu-ray player or any sort of games consoles or anything else that you would like to connect up to your soundbar and not your TV, you would not be able to. Now you might be thinking, why on earth would that be of relevance to me and why should I care? Well, let me give you a perfect example in my setup. My Samsung Q9 55-inch TV does not actually support Dolby Atmos natively. And as a result, when I'm doing my soundbar test, I always plug in my 4K Blu-ray player, which is capable of Dolby Atmos, straight into the soundbar, therefore giving me fantastic Dolby Atmos and also being able to actually experience Dolby Atmos. Unfortunately, I was not able to run that on the Sonos Beam Gen 2 because it does not have an HDMI input. So yet again, we're not stuck in 2016 where HDMI ports might be of a little bit limitation, and indeed, for example, HDMI 2.1 is now out. You would have expected a singular HDMI input, or even two, given the price point. But alas, that's not the case. And frankly, I'm very disappointed in this respect, because when it comes to connectivity, for me, Sonos comes to mind. However, in this respect, it just seems that you're limited quite severely, be it in terms of physical connectivity or wireless connectivity. Now with those frustrations aside, let me get on to an audio demo. It's not going to be ideal over YouTube, specifically not using my microphones, but it'll give you a little bit of a taster. First off, I'll be going on to a music demo with pre-adjaced track titled Like Me, and then going to a piece to camera whereby I'll be presenting the Hyundai Ioniq 6 on Totally EV. Premium at £47,000 and the Ultimate at £50,000. Within both trim levels, you then have a rear-wheel drive configuration, or for an additional £3,500, you can go for the all-wheel drive configuration. So in this review, you can see how it compares to some of its competitors, including its sibling, the Ioniq 5, and to see if it's actually worth its price tag. Now to kick off this review, we have to talk about efficiency and indeed aerodynamics. The Hyundai Ioniq 6 has a claimed drag coefficient of just 0.21. Now to put that into perspective, that's a smidge better than the likes of the Tesla Model 3 and even the likes of the Porsche Taycan, although it is a smidge under the likes of the Tesla Model S. So moving past the audio demos, I would like to talk about its speaker configuration. And here you've got 4 elliptic mid-range drivers, 2 at the sides and 2 at the center, and a singular tweeter, therefore tallying up to 5 active drivers. You then also have 3 passive woofers, 2 at the front and 1 at the rear. Now the combination is actually pretty impressive, and across the sound frequency range I was actually left impressed, at least when compared to some of the other alternatives out there in market, specifically at its price point. So let me break it down. Now first off, in terms of the sub-bass tones, it is arguably the weakest department of the Beam Gen 2, because it does not have a dedicated subwoofer. Indeed, in comparison to other systems that do have it at its price point or indeed cheaper, they do a little bit of a better job in terms of giving you the lower echelons of the bass tones. Now, of course, you could be quick to say that I could upgrade the Beam Gen 2 with a Sonos sub, but this will severely increase the price point of the soundbar and therefore take it out of contention in comparison to its competitors. So in this respect, it's just worth considering that the passive woofers do an okay job, specifically when placed on a cabinet, however, won't compete with dedicated systems out there that have a subwoofer. Now, as for its mid-bass, it actually left me really jaw-dropped. See here, both in terms of the quantity and the quality, it was done to perfection. At this price point, I can't think of one that actually would compete with it. Here, I did add a few notches in terms of the bass tones via the EQ, via the app, but of course that is all very subjective, so make sure you play around with it if you do own the Beam Gen 2. Now as for the mid-range, this is also another similar point that I was making about the mid-bass tones, because the mids actually come out to the foreground, which is actually quite a rarity, specifically at this price point. See here, the Beam Gen 2 does a far better job of delivering female and male vocals in comparison to the vast majority of its competitors. I would actually have to go to soundbars that cost a little bit more in order for me to get a similar sort of mid-range response. So therefore, Sonos should really be commended for what they've done with the overall mid-range. Now unfortunately, the highs are a little bit lackluster. That's purely because you've got a singular tweeter doing all the work. And in this respect, when you've got a little bit more challenging tracks, or for example, you're watching, let's say, some movies, you might find that the overall positional cues and therefore also the high-end extension just lacks a little bit of that top-end clarity. Therefore meaning that you might be left a little bit disheartened. Still, it's not too bad in the grander scheme of things, but I would have wished if Sonos had integrated 2 or potentially 3 tweeters instead to really bolster the experience. So finally we get onto its soundstage, and here I was left impressed by its overall instrument separation, but was left disheartened by the overall width and depth. Now don't get me wrong, for an all-in-one soundbar it does a decent job of filling the room. Specifically over here, if you can pair it up with some other speakers from the Sonos range, for example if you got 2 Era 100s or 2 Era 300s, then you can actually have rear speakers as well. But given that I do not have that on test, I couldn't really comment about how that actually would perform. But in this respect, for an all-in-one soundbar, it still does a decent job. It is just worth considering that if there was more drivers positioned in the soundbar, or indeed if we had a slightly larger form factor soundbar which had a little bit of that extra sort of width to it, it therefore would have provided a little bit of a better experience, specifically when watching movies. On that note, let's get on to a movie demo. I'll be playing back Transformers Age of Extinctions, and you'll be able to hear again via my microphones, which is not exactly ideal, how the Sonos Beam Gen 2 actually performs. So with the movie demo out of the way, I would just like to re-emphasize that I was running Dolby Digital 5.1 and not Dolby Atmos. Indeed, due to the limitations of the soundbar not having an HDMI input and my TV being slightly older, which might be very much applicable to a lot of consumers. Now indeed in this respect, even if I was able to benefit from Dolby Atmos, which uses heightened metadata, I would have not really been able to experience to its fullest because there's no upward facing drivers on the Beam Gen 2, which really is baffling to say the least. Now don't get me wrong, some other manufacturers are also at fault at doing this, in other words using Dolby Atmos in order to market their product. In this respect you've got no upward facing drivers and therefore the overall Atmos experience is going to be limited no matter which way you look at it. What I'm trying to say over here is that Dolby Atmos is somewhat being diluted in terms of what it should mean, and in comparison to systems that do have physical upward facing drivers or indeed rear speakers, then the Sonos Beam Gen 2 really cannot compete. And ultimately this really brings me on to my verdict. On one hand, I really love the musicality, the design and the comprehensive app of the Beam Gen 2. But on the other hand, the connectivity options are severely limited, specifically at this price point, and the fact that you do not have any sort of physical upward facing drivers for those people who really want to benefit from Dolby Atmos, well, it's really disheartening to say the least. So as such, I can't see myself actively recommending this soundbar, but it might be something that you might want to look at the alternatives, some of which I've reviewed and will be down in the description below for your own consideration. Now, hopefully this detailed independent review has given you everything you need to know about the Sonos Beam Gen 2, and if you have appreciated it, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.